Guys, thanks for joining me on stage here for a conversation about war, a conversation about logistics. So this is a really important subject, obviously, at any time, but particularly now in a moment in which there has been so much disruption in the business space and in supply chain and logistics. And sometimes founders are really struggling to just deliver on the expectations that their consumers have, to no fault of their own, except that it's just a crazy world out there and they can't get everything they need. I know that both of you, your companies have really been defined by how well you have mastered logistics. Let's start with that story from each of you. Jared, why don't you go first?
Sure. So we are a all-organic nitro cold brew coffee company. We started brewing nitro cold brew coffee in my apartment in 6th Street, 1st Avenue, right around here. When we first started, we were just brewing small scale in a keg. Eventually, we started brewing the coffee in a can, and we started walking around New York City, door to door, in any bar, restaurant in Brooklyn that would let us in, and selling them nitro coffee. And at that point in time, our product needed to be refrigerated. It was heavy lifting. It was slow brewed. And so as we started to transition to making our product shelf stable and working on our logistics, we're now able to sell our product all around the country.
Awesome. Carolyn.
And we are Tiny Organics. We make organic baby and toddler finger foods, similar to Jared. Just had a boots on the ground strategy, giving out free baby food in Prospect Park a couple years ago, and now shipping baby food direct to consumers nationwide. It ships frozen, comes in an insulated box, so that introduces a lot of logistics and supply chain complexities.
So we have what I would call an intimate crowd for this session, perhaps because logistics is not as sexy as celebrities. I don't know how that is possible, guys, but that seems to be the case. And there we go. So anyway, the reason that I point that out is to say, like, you know, look, we're going to have if you're sitting here, it's probably because logistics is on your mind, and so I would love to, like, actually bring your questions in. So let's do that earlier rather than later. But first, I teased it. We should talk about it. It's the big elephant in the room. What does the art of war have to do with logistics? This guy told me that he's a fan of Sun Tzu. Is that the art of war? And then literally, can you just do it? Can you just do it? Literally pulls the book out of his pocket. I mean, come on. So, Jarrett, how does the art of war guide you in logistics?
So I think the art of war guides me in just about everything in life. It's got incredible lessons in it that apply to just about everything today. But Sun Tzu said that there's 5 ways to determine who will be victorious. And I think the first 2 apply to not only logistics, but all business. First one is knowing when to fight and when not to fight. Second one is knowing when to apply more resources or when to apply less resources into something. And if you do both successfully, you will be victorious. So for us, the first fight was to know that we couldn't get our coffee shelf stable. We weren't going to be able to start shipping all over the country on day one. So our first battle, our first war, was to figure out how we could make enough coffee and ship it all over New York City, literally driving it door to door, brewing it in my apartment, brewing it in my co-founder's garage, and then eventually a brewery. Second war was figuring out how we can do more than kegs. At the time of our kegs, we were in 1,000 offices, from Apple to Google, Facebook, CAA, Live Nation. And that was a great marketing strategy because we could introduce our product to so many people in New York City. They could realize what our taste was, what our value proposition was, what nitro coffee was. Then we moved into cans, and then we could start shipping cans all around New York, Connecticut, but they needed to be refrigerated. So we couldn't ship them across the country. We couldn't ship them online. We couldn't ship them directly from our website. So our second war was figuring out how we could get our cans to be shelf stable. And by being shelf stable, we had to tweak the formula a little bit, find different co-packers, but that allowed us to be able to ship our cans all over the country. Now, where the second law of Sun Tzu, knowing when to pour more resources into something or less, when we became shelf stable, we still didn't have a big online presence. We were still focused on being on the ground, door to door, restaurants, on premise. When COVID hit, that all changed. Our entire on-premise business went to absolute zero overnight, and we had to figure out how to replace that with another aspect of our business. So we poured all of our resources into our shelf-stable cans and shipping them all across the country. We started looking into ways to market to people so we could ship directly from our warehouse, Amazon, Walmart, you name it, Thrive, Market, and we ended up becoming more successful with shipping our cans across the country than we ever were by just doing stuff on premise. So it was knowing when to apply more resources into one aspect of our business and when to pour less.
And Jared, do you feel like being refrigerated, how did you decide that that wasn't something worth fighting for and putting resources into? Did you make any sacrifices, or how did it turn out to be?
Yeah, 100%. So by being refrigerated, we had less margins. Shipping was way more expensive. So the customer would then have to pay double for our can in California, Alaska, you name it, anywhere outside the state. So we knew at that point in time we had to be shelf stable. To become shelf stable, it's a slightly different process. So we had to make sure that the flavor of our coffee tasted the same, if not better, than when we were brewing it at home, which took us a couple years and different variations. But once we got there or got close to it, it's been a really kind of successful path for us.
That's it. Wait, can you unpack that? You said once we got there or close to it.
So think of like Guinness. If you ever had a Guinness on draft, if you've ever been to Ireland and had Guinness on draft, it's incredible, beautiful Cascade taste, creamy and fresh. And then if you have it in New York City out of a can, it tastes creamy but not as fresh because it's a slightly different process. What you basically do when you become shelf stable, you put the can through the worst conditions it could ever go through. So then whatever it comes out tasting like, it won't go through any worse conditions than what it just went through. So because we only have coffee and water, organic coffee beans and filtered water in our can, there wasn't a lot that we could do. We couldn't add preservatives, we didn't add sugar, so we had to figure out different roasting profiles, different ratios of coffee beans to water so that it could taste similar to the product. But it'll never taste as good as it did in my apartment on 6th Street or 1st Avenue.
So it sort of goes through basic training, if we're just to be looking for more military analogies. I have lots more questions for these guys, but you know what? Like I said, it's an intimate crowd. If you have logistics on your mind, I think we might as well just bring it early. If not, I'll just keep asking. But if anybody has something that they're grappling with logistically and they just want to throw it in here and hear how these guys are thinking, raise your hand. If not, okay, maybe later. If not, maybe you have some, Carolyn, you have some Machiavellian analogies for logistics. It's okay, you don't actually have to. But you have an extremely deep background in this, running operations at brands like Fiji Water and Beyond Meat. What have you found to be the greatest challenges that founders aren't thinking about when they're trying to dig into their logistics?
Yeah. It's similar to what you Law 1 about what to fight for, and there's, depending on what your product is, there is some piece that is not substitutable, and whatever that piece is, that's what you would need to put resources into. And for us, what we discovered during COVID was that really investing in our own in-house manufacturing, so we didn't have to sacrifice taste profiles or changes that came from producing elsewhere, was what was not substitutable for us. And also where we invested in security, long-term, so that we could preserve that in the event of, you know, these supply chain issues that are coming up. Not anyone's fault, other than just the world.
I think one thing I'd say too is as you're figuring out your logistics, as you were just talking about, it becomes more expensive to sell your product farther away than where you make it. So a lot of companies have to figure out how they can make their same margin with that product and be dealing with all these shipping issues, price increases that are going on right now. And I think it's important that the companies think of it as almost like a pyramid, and you want it to be as narrow and as of a pyramid as possible, because as you're growing out, you want to make sure that the same core lessons, the same core values that you started your company with, that you built your consumer base with, that you stay true to that. And you don't all of a sudden, for us, we have to think about ingredients now. The Russian-Ukraine war has made it a lot harder for us to source sunflower oil, which we use for our oat milk. So we're trying to figure out different places to source sunflower oil. We could go to another ingredient that's not as good as organic sunflower oil, but that's what our consumers expect that from us right now. So I think it's really hard to keep growing and expanding, but expansion is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. But staying true to what got you there, I think, is the most important thing for us.
Carolyn, I was going to ask a little bit more about investing in in-house manufacturing. When do you think a company should, is there a formula, do you feel like, in which a company is at a certain point where that investment makes sense for them? Obviously, that's not something that every startup can do. You have to reach some level of scale at which investing in your own manufacturing makes sense. What are the things that you're looking for when you reach that tipping point?
There's no formula, and our decision was very much driven by COVID. So I didn't plan for the business to have this structure at all early days. I thought we would be in a third-party co-packer by now, and I wouldn't have any owned manufacturing that I had to worry about. And then when the pandemic happened, the co-mans that we were working with to scale up were making hand sanitizer and meals for the homeless and just didn't have the capacity to take on a small startup like us. So we invested a little bit further in in-house manufacturing. And to broaden the question for anyone else, I would say what we were looking at was, do we do something that can be easily done by someone else? What investment is required? If it's mostly by hand, right? Like, that's not too much investment. Is there equipment involved? These are kind of the questions that we're re-asking ourselves over and over again as the scale goes up too, and the answer might not always be the same. So we might not always be in-house manufacturing.
Yeah, I've got two more quotes for you guys. Bruce Lee, be like water, you know, formless, shapeless, and being able to adapt. And then Charles Darwin, the species that survives is not the strongest, it's the one that's most willing to adapt. And when COVID hits our businesses, we have to figure out different ways, different channels, different revenue streams, while also staying true to who we are. And I think it's really important to know that, expect the unexpected, and know that things are going to come up like wars, pandemics. And if you have multiple ways to sell your business and you set up the infrastructure so that you have a more diversified portfolio or streams of revenue, then you'll be better prepared for whatever hits us.
Yes, we've got a logistics question, please. Yeah, here, you know what? I'm going to run over to you because it's so hard to hear. Also, by the way, gold star, if there was an Olympics for connecting historical figures to logistics, this guy gets the gold medal.
No, my question was just, both of your companies have really unique and specialized packaging. And so I was just wondering, like, how much does that factor into the product that you're making and kind of like the uniqueness of your brand? And how have you been able to maintain that when there is, you know, challenges in maybe getting that, you know, specific packaging?
Good question.
Thank you, Rose.
Yeah.
Jarrett, what do you say?
So our cans have nitrogen widgets in them. So when you open it up, you'll hear a sound, and that's nitrogen literally trying to go home. 80% of the air is nitrogen. Nitrogen acts as a natural preservative, so it keeps our shelf life longer. Secondly, it makes it so there's no oxygen in our product, so our product's not getting oxidized, so it stays tasting fresh. As we looked into figuring out ways to logistically sell to more places, it was really important for us to have cans, because the other issue you run into is as you're shipping pallets all over the country, there's a lot of breakage. And even with our cans, we have a lot of people who send us pallets back. And it's a real surprise at our brewery when we get a couple pallets back for some breakage. So having a very durable, and I think in this day and age, recyclable, sustainable packaging, we transitioned from coffee to oat milk lattes, and then we started making our own oat milk, and now actually oat milk tea as well. But for our oat milk, we use Tetra Paks, and they're also easy to ship, and then it's also really easy for our grocery stores to receive the shipments and stack them on shelves.
Carolyn?
Our packaging is paper cups, so it's baby food you traditionally see in a jar or a plastic cup. We opted for paper just because it is very light in weight. It's fairly low cost. And because we store product frozen, paper cup works, just like for ice cream, for example. And because we ship direct to consumer only and ship frozen, there's a whole other element of packaging, which is the insulation and what keeps the product cold. So we have a dissolvable cornstarch insulation that keeps the product cold, and we ship with dry ice, which is my preferred frozen shipping method because it just dissolves into nothing. There's no leftover waste, and we, in general, as an ethos, just try to reduce the amount of materials. Nobody wants to be throwing away that much stuff, so just trying to make that as easy as possible for people.
So the third of the 5 ways that Sun Tzu said
Of course.
to guarantee victory actually relates to that question, and that is to make sure that your higher ranking officials and your lower ranking officials each share the same desire for victory. And where that relates is what we found is that our grocery stores was one of the top places we wanted to sell our product. And to be successful in there, we wanted the grocery stores to be rooting for us. So we wanted to figure out logistically what's the best way to store the product. They didn't want to use that precious refrigerated space to store our product. So that helped us transition to shelf stable because then they could store it anywhere. Didn't have to take up space for Tiny Organics and other products that needed to be stored refrigerated. The second part of that was as they were stacking it and storing it anywhere, we had to figure out how we could properly make boxes for our packaging so that it could store very well and be easy for people to grab out the back and then stack on shelves. So figuring out who you want to sell to and how you can make it as easy and awesome and better than the competition is also a really important way to actually reach consumers.
Any other logistics or art of war questions? Yes. I'm hoping for art of war. No, logistics.
I'm just speaking on behalf of founders that logistics is that's not what they're good at. Where do you find logistics people to hire? How do you find teams of people that are great at logistics if you're just not that person,
Great question, thank you.
A really good question and also very true. I think Force Brands we use. I don't know if Dustin's walking around here somewhere, but figuring out other companies who are really good at finding people who have a lot of experience in logistics, I think is a really good way to start. You can always find people through friends, but figuring out what the companies are that specialize in doing that, because it is a very specialized trait, I think is really important.
I am the logistics co-founder, so between myself and my co-founders, we have really complementary skill sets, and mine is the one that's in logistics and operations. So where one of us kind of lacks some skills, the other has them, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think imitation is the greatest form of flattery too. So look at other companies that you think are running really well in your category and doing a really good job logistically, and check LinkedIn or look at some of the brands that specialize in hiring and recruiting people. And if they work at that company that you thought did a really good job and they're up for hire, I think that'd be a really good way to start.
Do you think, so you're the logistics co-founder, you're recommending finding people. Is this something that you feel like founders who are not logistics people should be trying to deeply educate themselves in, or is it just such a game of catch-up that you need to have somebody who you're working with who really understands this?
I think it's stages, and I think the first stage for us was seeing if we could create a product that someone wanted to buy. Second stage was seeing if we could create a product that someone could make profit on selling. Third real thing for us was figuring out if that person could sell that product to someone that we don't know. So at that point in time, it wasn't logistics. I was buying coffee beans at a local cafe and losing $120 per keg we were selling. But first thing is figuring out if you have a product. So logistically, just figure out how to make it as best you can, figure out if you can sell it to somebody. Then once you realize you have something, then I think you slowly start figuring out how you can share it with more people and see if it's something that you really want to dedicate your life to. But I wouldn't put any roadblocks or hurdles in front of yourself before you figure those two things out, because there's going to be hundreds of roadblocks and hurdles that come your way after that. But logistically, I think focus on the product, see if you can sell it, We have kind of a thing that we used to say is first rule is get in the garage, make the product. Second rule is get out of the garage because you can. It's like a oak tree that's in a small pot. It can only grow so much, but you can grow a good foundation. And then the next thing you have to do is figure out a way bigger plot of land so you can have your tree grow as prosperous as possible.
And I think the best you can do along the way is to build out your organization collaboratively so that those branding and product decisions are made with your logistics in mind, and just a real transparency between departments so that it's a safe environment for whoever your logistics person ends up being to raise their hand and say that's going to be really hard for us to do. Or when you hear them say, we'll make it work, then you know that they've been able to speak freely about where the challenges and opportunities are.
Anybody else? Yes, please. I'm going to come down with the mic.
Great story for all of you. Big congratulations. I want to ask you about distribution. And you mentioned that you had a big challenge during COVID, that going door to door, doing it all by yourself, you had to completely rebrand and restructure. So for a lot of young companies, when they start and when they're facing that road that they need to either sign up with the distributor or do it like you did it door to door, the high fees, how do you go about it? Because they basically eat all the margins. And what's the best way you would recommend to go? Do you continue door to door, but at a certain point you just have to make this decision? How much can you go door to door? So do you go with the distributor that eats most of your margins? Like, what do you suggest?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. We can ham and egg it. You have to eventually go to distributors. Two things that I think we think about and when we're going to a distributor is, one, who are we trying to reach? Who's the end goal? Because the distributor is going to be the middle person in between that. So some distributors really specialize in the convenience channel. Some specialize in the organic grocery channel. Our first big distributor was just that. We wanted to get into all the Whole Foods, and we had to start in the New York area. So we figured out what company was the best company to service and also pitch Whole Foods, which was a company called Rainforest, based in New York City. So we used Rainforest, and that was an incredibly great decision for us and allowed us to grow our business. The second thing that we were thinking about is, as we were going national, it was a similar mindset. Who do we want to reach? Is it a convenience channel? Is it a groceries channel? And because it was grocery again, we said, okay, well, who's going to be the best for grocery? You also have to think about the long-term deal of a distributor and how hard it is to buy yourself out of it. So when you're thinking about who you're going to partner with in the future, if you're going to partner with Coca-Cola, then you don't want to work with the Pepsi distributor. If you're going to partner with Budweiser, you don't want to partner with the Coors distributor. So you have to look at the distributors, look at what you want out of the relationship, figure out how many stores they service, that is the right stores for you, and then what other brands they work with and how that can either be helpful or hurt you one day.
Carolyn, anything to add on distributors?
Because we're direct to consumer only at this point, we're still not in traditional like retail distribution, but the big distribution part of our business is third-party logistics providers. They're scattered around the U.S. that are able to ship perishables, around the U.S. in a timely manner. And in the same spirit, though, of going door to door, we self-fulfilled as long as we possibly could. I ordered dry ice deliveries into the office, and I hand-packed those as long as I could. So I don't know when the answer is, but we held out as long as possible before opening ourselves up to the extra distribution channel challenges.
Anyone else have logistics on the mind? Okay. So let me ask you guys, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I remember a lot of people talking about the sudden realization of the importance of redundancy. And the idea being, oh my God, it turns out that if one little part of your supply chain or logistics chain falls apart, as suddenly happened in the very beginning of the pandemic, then everything breaks. And what you really should have is starting to think about, well, what's plan B, C, and D for how to source this or that. and that more companies need to be thinking about that so that they can navigate when crazy things happen. And that popped back into my head a few minutes ago, Jarrett, when you were talking about the sunflower seed problem that you're now having because of the war in Ukraine, because it's just like, who thinks that this thing over there impacts this random thing over here? So how much is that on your mind? Did you feel like the pandemic has shifted in some ways the way that you guys think about logistics? And what's your advice for folks about how to be thinking about that smartest now in a world in which any crazy damn thing could happen?
Yeah, 100%. I think you always want to figure out what the backup plan is. For us, we started making all the products in the United States. We started canning everything at our brewery. We got up to about 20,000 cans a day, and then we had to figure out how we could do more than that. So we looked into places in Europe, places in North America, and we actually make these cans in the Netherlands. And we can do about 1 million cans per day in the Netherlands, which is a lot better than 20,000. But as COVID hit, as the war hit, as there's been a lot of shipping issues, as the dollar's fluctuating, we now have to look at multiple places to make our products. So we make our oat milk in the United States, we make our cans in Europe, but now we've looked into various other co-packers in Mexico, in Maryland, in California, and we're actually now working with all of them to a small degree where we'll make a small amount just so they know that we're in their mind space and we have some line time. But 100%, we're looking at different places to order all of our ingredients. We're always testing ingredients now that are made in different places to see if it tastes the same, so that we have options.
We're just looking to constantly stress test anything we're doing, and we've all been through like what we thought was the ultimate stress test, but there will continue to be more. And it is always something. There's an apple shortage. Who knew? Climate change.
Is there currently an apple shortage?
There's an apple shortage.
I did not know about the apple
It will
shortage.
be tight for 14 months per my suppliers. And so, but we're just, I don't have an answer yet for the apples either. But we are just constantly looking at, like you said, if this breaks, what's the backup plan? And every step of the supply and distribution chain, question yourself constantly about what could go wrong.
Yeah, great. And I think if you're in food and beverage, you should be tasting those ingredients as much as possible too, because it takes a while to get to that flavor formulation that you want. And when something bad happens, you don't want to have to immediately just use whatever the first option is to get the product out there, because it might not be what you actually really like. And then once it's out there, it's out there. So constantly testing things as if something's going to happen with apples or sunflower oil.
On that, we do a lot of really robust consumer testing, and with our friendliest customers, anytime we're preparing for a change that we might need to make, we'll test as much as possible just to get a constant feedback loop.
We have about 2 minutes left. Just want to make sure if there's any lingering thoughts of logistics on anyone's mind. No? Okay, well then here's what I'm going to ask you guys to close it out. You guys have learned a lot in your journey so far, and we've shared a lot of that. But if you can think back to the very beginning, what do you wish you knew that would have helped you maybe avoid your very first logistics mistake? What would that have been? What did you really screw up? How can you embarrass yourself on the stage right now?
I would say that, to quote another
of course,
famous person,
please.
Rocky Balboa, the world is not all sunshine and rainbows. It can be a mean and nasty place. It'll hit you, and it'll hit you to the ground and keep you there if you don't get up. But it's not about how hard you get hit. It's about how hard you can take a hit and keep moving forward. And for us, I think we've gone through a lot of challenges, and those challenges have become opportunities, because the better you can move forward, the better mentality you have, everybody's going to go through the apple shortage. Everybody's going to go through a sunflower oil shortage. So that's a challenge, but challenges are opportunities. So if you and your team can keep moving forward, figure out the best processes, prepare yourself as much as possible, you have the best chance to get through those wars, those battles.
And broadly, I would say that when in doubt, to just ask your customers, and they will tell you what their sensitivity is to flavor changes, to price, to lead times, so you can get data-driven answers to those kinds of questions.
Can I just, I'm just getting the signal that I need to talk for another minute. So here's what I'm going to ask. Fun. This is just something that you can take home and say at a party tonight. We've learned war in Ukraine really screwing up sunflowers. We've learned that there's an apple shortage. Didn't know about that. What other crazy thing is happening in the world right now? What have you? Where is there a shortage? What are you struggling to source right now? What can I go home to my wife and tell her? Did you know that it's really hard to get peanut butter now? Is there anything?
Peanut butter with sunflower oil is probably pretty hard.
Oh, there it is. How about that? All right, good. Success.
Did you know that it's very hard to get a French fry cut of anything other than a white potato?
No. You mean like a sweet potato?
Zucchini fries.
Oh yeah.
It only comes in white potato.
Why?
I guess not enough demand for zucchini fries.
We got to boost the I like a zucchini fry. Who doesn't like a zucchini fry? Does anybody here hate zucchini fries? Because you get out. Leave the building. You're the logistics problem right now. That is such a weird thing. Wait, so then how do I, oh yeah, all right, now I'm getting the signal that we're actually ready to go. So all right, well, guys, thank you so much. Carolyn, Jarrett, this has been fantastic. We've learned about logistics. We've learned about the art of war. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.